If you do like these tank chats, do please subscribe to the Tank Museum's YouTube channel.
This is the M48, known as the Patton, but then so are many other tanks. It's a very early model, and you can tell that by two or three things. The first one, the most obvious, is the fact that it doesn't have the cupola with the built-in machine gun. It's got a nearly flush cupola with a machine gun on top, but we'll come to that later. All the M48s were quite a revolutionary tank in their day. Came out about 1952 to begin with. They had an all-cast hull, cast more or less in one piece, which made it a lot stronger and a lot simpler to make. Earlier tanks had used castings, notably the M47 and the M46, but they were largely welded in sections rather than done as a whole unit, and that makes quite a difference. So that was how this thing was built, and it's resulted in this unusual rounded shape with the angular nose on it that you see here. It makes it very typically American, for one thing. The tallness, as much as anything else, probably makes it so, but the cast turret also has that rounded effect. It's got a larger turret ring than any of the earlier tanks because of this. It makes more room inside, enables them to fit a larger gun if they need to, quite effective in a way. It's got a 90mm gun fitted to it. This again is quite an early gun. It's got the smoke discharger and the muzzle brake at the front and the smoke discharger further back, really right up near the muzzle, and more or less obvious perhaps than some of them are, but it's there just the same. And the muzzle brake's the T-shaped thingy at the end there, and that really just stops the thing from making heavy recoil, and also supposedly clears the air so that they can observe fall of shot, which isn't always easy. It's powered by a V12 petrol engine, air-cooled, driving through an automatic 2-ratio gearbox. So all the driver has to do is select low or high ratio or reverse. Otherwise he doesn't have any gears to change at all. It's all automatic. And for that reason, the driver's controls include pedals for brake and accelerator, but no clutch. He doesn't need a clutch. He also, first time in an American tank, uses a steering wheel. It's a rather odd-shaped thing, but it uses a wheel instead of a wobble stick to guide the tank and steer it when he's inside. That's why it's done like it is. And it makes the driver's job quite easy once the hatch on the later ones was made a little bit bigger, because they did find a certain difficulty in getting people in and out of that small hatch to begin with. But this is a very early tank, as you can see. It's got the torsion bar suspension, and you can always tell it's an M48 and not a T48, as we first thought, by the small wheel at the back behind the last road wheel, which is the only real external identification between the T48 prototype and the M48 production models. So that's how they were done. You've got light clusters in the front, the exhaust of the heater there. Each crew member has his own heater, petrol fueled, which supposedly kept him warm in winter. The turret, of course, has a cross turret rangefinder. You can see it on the top there by the two blobs, one here and one on the other side. It was a stereoscopic rangefinder, and you can get a coincidence rangefinder as well, but the stereoscopic ones are assuming that the person viewing them knows how to use it and has the right sort of eyes to use it. The stereoscopic one is much more accurate. It means that you've done away with the whole idea of having the tank commander estimate the range by peering out of his cupola, which you did in the Second World War, and you have a machine that can measure it for you. Now that cross turret arrangement gives it the greater width because it's a larger turret, and the wider the two are apart, the more effective it is as a rangefinder. If they're really close together, as they were on the M47, you tended not to get such a clear image, and you couldn't estimate range so accurately. With this, it feeds first of all into the sight, obviously, for the gunner, but also into a sort of computer. It's, I mean, you wouldn't call it a computer these days. It's a manual thing compared with the electronics we're used to now, but it's there really to estimate things like the height the gun has to go to in order to fire accurately over a certain distance. So the rangefinder first selects the range, and the computer then works out the exact angle they want the gun to fire at. That's why it's done like it is. And that's how the tank's done inside as well. The radios are all in the back of the turret. That's something they've picked up presumably off the British, because originally most American tanks had a separate radio operator who lived in a different part of the tank and worked the radio from there. But now you've got a 4-man crew. That's the driver here and the 3 men in the turret, the loader, the gunner and the tank commander, who occupy the turret and are really the fighting hub of the tank. They're the ones that matter. Now, in addition to the 90mm gun, you've got a 30 caliber Browning normally alongside it. You notice there's no hull machine gun. There was on the M26, but they've done away with the hull machine gun. They regard that as ridiculous. So you've got a 30 caliber coaxial gun, if you like, and then a 50 caliber on the cupola. Now, as I said earlier, this cupola is slightly different from the cupolas on all the later versions of the M48. They have an enclosed cupola with a lid on it, which has the machine gun built in. This doesn't. You have the 50 caliber exposed like that, with a much lower profile cupola behind it. Now the thing is that you could fire the 50 cal from inside the tank. Probably not terribly accurately, but enough to make a noise and frighten people away. You could even load it. You swung the thing around so that the loader, who has a hatch on the left, can get at the machine gun and load it from there if he needs to, even under fire, with a reasonable amount of protection. That's why it's done like that. But they always carry a 50 caliber on the American tanks. They've always liked them. And it's a good heavy machine gun, an excellent weapon. That's the basis of the thing. I say, an air-cooled V12 engine, something in the region of 700 horsepower, giving this tank a top speed of between 20 and 30 miles an hour. It weighs about, it depends whether we're talking short tons, the American tons, or the longer British tons. But by the American rating, it weighs about 49 tons. By the British calculation, about 44 tons. So it was still quite light for its day. And it is a big tank, there's no two ways about it. You can see that when you look at it. It's a huge size for a tank. And it set a pattern that became standardized on the M60, which followed it, and then vanished completely with the appearance of the Abrams, their current main battle tank. But otherwise, really, it was the start of a new generation of tanks and a whole new outlook on tank production. It was built in the United States by 3 companies, Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors, built in huge numbers, and it's seen a tremendous amount of use on the export market. The Americans used them in Vietnam because they've got torsion bar suspension. They like that. But because none of the suspension units are molded into the hull but are separate to it, it meant that if it was damaged by a mine, it could be repaired and run out again easily without having to send the hull back to the USA to have the new shafts put on. That's the only reason they kept this model. It's got slightly wider tracks also than you'll find on the M47. They've widened. It's really rather like one of those live tracks. It's rubber coated, and you can see there how it has the chevron effect of a cross-country track, really, but really with a rubber face on it. But they're double pin tracks, and left to their own devices, they'll coil up, but put on the tank, they work pretty well, except they do get a bit hot now and again. Otherwise an excellent tank in many ways, and it's served well. It's done tremendously in Israel and probably been sort of modified out of all recognition. It's served throughout the world. It's been in action in a number of countries, including, as I say, with the American forces in Vietnam. It's done extremely well over the years. This particular version of the M48 is quite rare now. They've mostly become M48A3 and A5, usually with the 105mm gun, which gives them a lot more punch. So if you want to see a really early M48 Patton, this is one of the places you can be sure of seeing one. They are quite rare. So come along when you've got the time, when all this other fuss is over, and have a look at it, because if you're interested, this is the beginnings of a whole new generation of tank.
In these difficult times, obviously your support is really valued. So please do keep following us on social media, do subscribe to our channel, and if you've got the opportunity, perhaps order something from our shop, join one of our schemes like Patreon or our Friends organisation, and we'll try and keep going with giving you some content to keep you informed and entertained.